I, 25, female, had twins a month ago and have been going through something really weird. My sister-in-law, 28, female, is a divorced woman and has been living with her mother ever since she left her husband, which was almost a year ago. I used to look up to her as someone really sure of themselves and what they wanted because of the reason that she'd left her husband. They'd been married for 2 years and had been together for almost 4, but somehow had never really gotten around to talking about kids. 1 year into the marriage, my sister-in-law told her husband that she wanted a baby, but he said that kids were never in the picture for him and he wasn't planning on changing his mind anytime soon. After 1 year of trying to convince him, she finally realized that he wasn't ever going to come around, and so she left. My husband told me this story while we were dating, and I thought it was amazing how she wasn't afraid of leaving her husband when she realized that they weren't on the same page about something so important to her. My husband and I got married almost 6 months ago, 1 month after we'd found out that I was pregnant. It just seemed like the perfect time. All through the pregnancy, my sister-in-law had been very enthusiastic and helpful, and I was grateful for it. I'd heard of nightmarish sister-in-laws from my other friends, so having such an amazing sister-in-law myself made me feel really thankful. But after the babies were born, things took a really strange turn. 2 weeks after they were born, my sister-in-law started visiting me every single day and wanted to play with the babies. I didn't mind it at first, since it was only natural to want to spend time with babies when you love kids. And after all, she'd been really helpful during my pregnancy and had constantly been running errands for me. So this was the least that I could do for her, and it sometimes gave me a break from looking after the twins as well. I'd nap whenever she'd come over since I trusted her implicitly, but one day I woke up from my nap and walked in on her crying in the living room while holding one of the twins in her arms. She wiped her tears as soon as she saw me, and I didn't think much of it and chalked it up to sadness from not having her own child yet. I knew she loved kids, and it must be hurtful for her to visit me every day just so that she can spend some time with my babies. I didn't speak about it after that because I didn't want her to feel awkward or embarrassed about what I'd witnessed. 1 week after that incident, she dropped by in the evening as usual. This time, though, she seemed more formal, and I could sense that she was nervous about something. After she spent some time hanging out with the babies and talking to me about life, she asked me if she could take one of my babies home with her. I was really confused, and for a while, I didn't even know how to answer that. I thought that she meant it temporarily, but even then, I wasn't comfortable with the idea of just letting her take one of my babies home, and so I told her the same. She looked a little taken aback and offended and said that she was perfectly capable of taking care of a baby. I still declined, saying that while I had no doubts about her capabilities, I didn't want to spend time away from my baby, which is when she looked really surprised and asked me if I was saying no to letting her take one of the twins. I thought she was joking and ended up laughing, since there was literally no way that she actually expected me to just give one of my babies away. But she looked totally serious and said that the only reason she'd been taking care of me during my pregnancy and coming over every day to babysit the kids was so that eventually she'd be able to take one of them home and raise him as her own. I was stunned by what she was saying, and it took me a while to come up with something to say to her. I told her that while I was grateful for whatever she'd done for me so far, I didn't intend on giving my babies up, and this had never even been agreed upon, so I don't know why she thought I'd give one of my twins up anyway. She got huffy and left, complaining about how I wasted her time and made a fool out of her. I didn't mention any of it to my husband, since I myself was so confused about what had just happened, and I was hoping that she was actually just joking around, because otherwise, it was just a super messed up thing to ask of me. But it didn't end there, and for the next few days, she kept demanding that I let her take one of the twins to repay her for whatever she did and that I owe this to her. I managed to keep things quiet for a while, but a few days ago, she dropped by again and she looked really angry. She told me that I owed her this much after all that she'd done to help me during my pregnancy, and even in the past few weeks. I tried explaining to her that while I was thankful for everything, I wasn't going to give up one of the babies no matter what she did. And it was ridiculous of her to even expect that I'd agree to something as outrageous as this. I told her that my decision was final, and that's when she started sobbing, saying that I'd snatched away her only chance at motherhood. She called me cruel and evil and several other things, and even though I did feel terrible for her, I obviously wasn't going to change my mind. When she realized that crying wasn't going to help, she got mad and threw a temper tantrum. I let her scream at me since that day. Luckily, my kids were with my mother as I needed to get some work done around the house. But the last straw was when she tried to slap me since I wasn't reacting at all. I caught her hand mid-air and told her that I'd had enough, then forced her to leave my house. I was furious that she tried to physically harm me after I'd been so polite and kind to her. She was being a psycho, and I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. So that evening, after my husband returned from work, I told him every single thing that had happened so far, and he was shocked by the end of it. I told him that I wanted to go no contact with her, and he agreed, saying that her behavior was absolutely crazy and he didn't expect this from his sister in the least. He seemed stunned, just as I had felt the first time she'd asked me to give her one of the twins. We blocked her everywhere, and I guess when she found out about it, she complained to her mother. I don't know why she did that, because I don't understand what my mother-in-law is going to do about this except try to make me feel guilty about this whole situation, which is exactly what she's doing now. After she found out about how my husband and I had cut her daughter off in every possible way, she called my husband up and told him that this was no way to treat his own sister. She tried to lecture him on the importance of family values, but he wasn't having any of it and told her off, saying that his sister was the one who needed to learn the importance of these values, since she believed that she could just ask people to give their kids away and they'd gladly do it too. This led to an argument between them, and he decided to hang up while she was trying to rant about how he was wrong. So my mother-in-law took a different approach and began texting me about how I was being ungrateful and cruel. She told me that in spite of knowing how much my sister-in-law wanted children, I was still keeping that joy from her. She accused me of being selfish and discarding her daughter once I didn't need her help anymore, which is just not true. She still would have been welcome at my house had she been a normal person, but she turned into a total psycho once I told her that I would like to keep both my kids. I know that my mother-in-law is trying to make me feel guilty, and I'm afraid it's working since now I'm questioning every decision I've made. I feel like I inadvertently did lead my sister-in-law into believing in something that was never going to happen, and I should have verbalized that beforehand. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or whatever, but I need to know if I'm in the wrong here. AITA for banning my sister-in-law and refusing to let her have one of my babies, even though she helped me throughout my pregnancy and even afterward? Update 1. After going through all the comments, I realized that I didn't mislead my sister-in-law into believing anything at all and decided not to speak to her. My husband also reassured me that I wasn't at fault here and was most definitely not the bad guy for refusing to give up my babies. Now that I think of it, I can hardly even believe that my sister-in-law and mother-in-law were almost successful in gaslighting me into believing that I was somehow the one to blame for how this whole situation had turned out. I felt really awful about whatever had been happening for the past few days and had been quite visibly down in the dumps. And to add to that, My mother-in-law constantly kept texting me to remind me of how evil and selfish I supposedly was. That obviously didn't help, and I could hardly even think about anything else other than my sister-in-law and how miserable she must have felt when I said no to her ask. That was up until yesterday, though. Since after that, my husband spoke to me about how I'd been feeling and told me that while it was okay to feel bad about what had happened, I most certainly shouldn't blame myself for something as crazy as this. He also told me to block his mother as well, since it was very obvious that she was trying to emotionally manipulate me into feeling bad, and that wasn't good for me, especially with my postpartum hormones. He also took me out to dinner and told me that he'd been working from home for the next couple of days so that he could spend more time with me and the babies. That did cheer me up because while I do love my babies to the moon and back, there's still a lot of work, and even though my mother does come by to help, it still does take a toll on me. So it'll certainly be nice to have my husband at home with me. He also told me that I don't have to bottle up my feelings when it comes to his family and should tell him right away if his mother or sister try to attack me again, and he'll deal with it. He's being really protective of me, and honestly, I'm very happy about it. Update 2. So my sister-in-law and mother-in-law decided to visit us a few hours ago. It's been almost 3 days since the last update, and since we cut them off, we'd assumed that they dropped the whole baby thing, but I guess not. My mother-in-law seemed very pissed off that we'd blocked her as well and barged into the house even though I told her that I didn't want them here anymore, so they needed to leave. My husband decided to speak to them and told me to take care of the babies instead while he handled this situation. I wasn't in the room to hear what exactly was going on, but I could hear raised voices and knew that they must be arguing about something. After some time, I heard a loud crash, and that's what set all the alarms off in my head. Thankfully, the babies hadn't woken up yet, so I rushed to check out what exactly happened in the living room. To my shock, I discovered that a big glass flower vase that we kept for display had been smashed to bits on the floor, while my husband stood in the corner, dumbstruck. My mother-in-law looked a little alarmed as well, but it was just my sister-in-law who seemed unfazed and had a defiant and angry look on her face. When she noticed I'd entered the room, she told me that this was all my fault and that I was responsible for crushing all her hopes and dreams of becoming a mother. I was shocked to the core that she'd done something as crazy as this and decided that I'd had enough. I told the two of them to leave immediately or I'd call the police and make sure that they were arrested for harassing us nonstop. She looked like she wanted to argue, but my mother-in-law didn't want to get into trouble, so she grabbed her hand and rushed out. After they left, my husband spent the next few minutes cleaning up the mess while I tried to compose myself since I was feeling unbelievably anxious and couldn't bear the thought of what else my sister-in-law was capable of. She was clearly turning violent and unhinged simply because of the fact that I denied her something. I don't know why she felt entitled to my child, but I knew for a fact that she was going to come after me if I didn't take measures to prevent it soon. Even my husband said that while they'd been arguing about what had happened, she'd seemed crazed and psychotic. It was his mother who'd been yelling at him for taking my side over his sister's and depriving her of a child. My sister-in-law had just been sitting on the couch quietly. But when he said that we didn't owe her anything, she snapped and smashed the vase. I don't even know where she got the strength to lift that thing because it's pretty heavy. Right now, we're terrified of what she might do next, truth be told. Update 3. So my sister-in-law decided to make a post on Facebook talking about how I'd wronged her and made her run like a fool while I was pregnant, only to go back on my words after the babies were born and refuse to give one of the twins to her. I found out from one of our relatives, and I was shocked that she decided to go public with this allegation since literally not one word of it is true. I'd never promised her anything at all, and my husband and I decided to make it clear by posting on our accounts as well. And here's where it gets interesting. My sister-in-law's ex-husband somehow found the post that my husband had made and told us something about her that made us realize exactly how crazy she was. Apparently, the real reason they had to get a divorce was because while he wasn't ready for kids, she was and kept trying to pressure him into saying yes. When he refused, she threatened to cheat on him, which was the last straw for him. He's the one who filed for divorce and not the other way around, like my sister-in-law had been telling us. He told me that she'd scream and act hysterical any time they would argue about having children, which just reinforced his belief that a woman like her shouldn't be a mother at all because she had absolutely zero control over her own temper. She also broke stuff around the house anytime she lost her cool, which is something we'd witnessed firsthand as well. He warned us that she could go to any length just for a baby, and we should try to file for a restraining order or something, because there's no telling what she might do. Now that she's older and her chances of becoming a mother anytime soon seem to be decreasing steadily. We thanked him for telling us about his side of the story, and it was definitely eye-opening for us to learn what kind of person my sister-in-law actually was. All this while, I've been feeling bad for her since she couldn't find someone decent to settle down with, but now I realize that it's her own fault. She's the one who needs intensive therapy to deal with whatever anger issues she has. I'm regretting ever letting her into my home and life right now, to be honest. And on top of that, all of those hours that I left my kids alone with her. It's just insane that I let such a thing happen. I'm really, really lucky that nothing untoward happened because I don't think I would have ever been able to forgive myself if anything had happened to my babies because of her. Anyway, my husband and I are looking for family lawyers so that we can file a restraining order against her and make sure that she doesn't ever bother us again. We're absolutely done with her. We try to deal with things peacefully, but clearly that's not an approach that works with her, so we're going a different way altogether now. Update 4. We filed for a restraining order, and as soon as my sister-in-law was served, she decided to ignore all the legal repercussions and showed up at our house. She showed up in the afternoon and demanded an explanation for what we were doing. My husband had been the one to open the door this time, and he hadn't allowed her to enter our house, so the conversation was happening right outside the door. As soon as I realized who he was talking to, I decided to go to the bedroom with my baby since I absolutely did not want to see her. I could hear them arguing outside while my baby slept. She was, as usual, accusing me of ruining her life and calling me a cheater. I still didn't understand why she believed that I owed her my child, but whatever. I was going to let my husband handle it since I didn't trust her one bit. She was obviously stronger than me, but my husband was stronger than her, so it was better for him to deal with her. I was still concerned about his safety, though, and had my phone ready in my hand to call the cops if I needed to. They argued for quite a while, and eventually their voices rose and reached the point of screaming, which disturbed my kids' sleep. Within seconds, though, my husband ended the argument by slamming the door in her face. I thought that she'd leave then, but she didn't, and continued to scream at the top of her lungs, standing outside our house. We were about to call the police when suddenly it went real quiet outside. For a few minutes, we were convinced that she was finally gone and were about to leave the bedroom, but that's when we heard a deafening crash which woke the babies up. They looked alarmed, but thankfully didn't start crying until after a few minutes had passed. I was terrified of what was happening and stayed in one corner of the room and sat on the floor while my husband called 911. We didn't dare move from our places while we waited for the police to show up. That's how terrified we were of what was going to happen now. After around 10 minutes of being scared out of our wits, the cops finally pulled up to our house. By then, my sister-in-law was nowhere to be found. The cops looked around the house, and to our horror, we found that the sound of glass breaking had come from the baby's nursery. My sister-in-law had picked up a considerably big stone from the backyard and thrown it in through the window. There was glass all over the cribs. And I simply broke down thinking about how this could have gone terribly wrong. I couldn't stop imagining what would have happened had my babies been in the nursery instead of with me, and kept sobbing. I don't remember much of what happened after that, since my husband was the one who dealt with the cops and pressed charges against his sister. My mother showed up, and all I remember is being taken to her home and being put to sleep with the babies, since I was dizzy, probably because of the panic attack I'd had when I saw the state of the nursery. I woke up at noon today and the reality of the situation had finally sunk in. I was feeling really anxious and paranoid, but I was glad to find that my husband had also come over to my mother's house after he was done with all the paperwork and stuff. He told me that his sister had been arrested and he was trying to get the hearing date moved up so that we could be done with the restraining order faster, since this was turning into something very dangerous. He also told me that he was terribly sorry about all of this, and I had to reassure him that I didn't think any of this was his fault in the slightest. His sister being a crazy psycho is not something that I'm going to blame him for, obviously. Anyway, we're staying with my mother, who's been gracious enough to open up her home to us until we're done with the court stuff. I'm truly grateful that nothing happened to me or my family, but I'm going to make sure that that psycho woman stays away from us forever after this. Update 5. Hey, so almost 3 weeks have passed since the last update, and I only have good news to share this time, thankfully. We were able to get a restraining order against my sister-in-law for 5 years quite easily after that whole incident. And also, whatever her ex-husband had told us helped as well. She also got a sentence of 3 months for trying to hurt my babies, and I'm glad she's in prison now and can't even touch us anymore. Just to make extra sure, we're planning to move to a bigger house soon anyway. My mother-in-law is furious and has cut us off entirely, but I can't say that it bothers me at all. In fact, I'd say that this was a good riddance. I'm hoping to finally have some peace and quiet and spend some time with my family without having to worry about anything else. My husband and I can finally be normal parents now, and I'm really happy. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.